Hi guys, Petrik here. Today's video will be all the best books that I've read in 2020. This is the first time I'm making this list on BookTube. Usually I make this list only on my blog, Novel Notions. And well, I thought this might be a good time for me to try doing it on BookTube as well. This year in total, I've read 119 books. 91 of them is traditionally published and 28 of them is sub-published. And in total, the number of pages I've read is 61.9 thousand pages. It's about 1,000 pages higher than my previous year, so not bad at all. I'm very satisfied with this number. Before I begin the list, I want to mention a few things. On this list, there are no rereads, and the books aren't exclusively published this year. So yeah, once again, these are just the best books that I've read within this year that I read for the first time. Although there is a ranking to this list, I do highly recommend everything on this list, because I do rate the 20 books on this list with a 4.5 or 5 out of 5 stars rating, and all of them are in my favorite shelf. And I have already talked about some of these books listed here on this channel before, so I'm sorry if I sound a bit repetitive, but well, here it is. At the number 20 spot is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This one is published in 2011, and I just talked about this book in my previous video. Basically, this was the first time I read anything by Madeline Miller, and I'm thoroughly impressed by it. I honestly didn't expect that I would enjoy The Song of Achilles that much, because I've read and watched Trojan War retelling so many times now, but I really did. Madeline Miller's prose is absolutely beautiful, the book was heartbreaking, and the characterizations of Patroclus and Achilles were so well written, and I totally love the relationship development between the two of them. It's such a wonderful book, one of the best standalone that I've read, and I highly recommend it. At the number 19 spot is The Crimson Queen by Alec Hutson. This is the first book in the Raveling trilogy, a finished trilogy by the way, a great trilogy, and this was first published in 2016. The Crimson Queen was the runner-up in SPFBO, sub-published fantasy blog of in 2017. And I think Alec Hutson is such an underrated author. In my previous video, I praised Brian Staffely's prose so much, and in my opinion, well, Alec Hutson's prose is very reminiscent of Staffely's. Such a great writer. I definitely recommend this book to those who love classic fantasy, but told with a modern narrative voice. At the number 18 spot is Underlord by Wight. This is the 6th book in the Cradle series, and Underlord was published in 2019. A very popular self-published series, and right now there are 8 books published. I recently talked about this, that the 8th book managed to be at the number 1 best-selling book in the entire Kindle store. But in my opinion, the 6th book, Underlord, is still the best of the entire series. I highly recommend this one, especially if you love progression fantasy, shonen manga, and shonen anime. Definitely give this one a try. At the number 17 spot is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the first book in the Between Earth and Sky trilogy. And this one is so amazing. This was the first time I tried Rebecca Roanhorse book. She is more well known for her urban fantasy series that starts with the Trail of Lightning. I haven't read that one, but this one is absolutely amazing. So fast-paced, and the world building is fascinating, and the narrative was so riveting. At the number 16 spot is The Boonshot Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This is the first book in the Holo Empire trilogy. I'll keep this one short. Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames was my favorite debut in 2017. The Poppy War by Rebecca Kwong was my favorite debut in 2018. And The Gutter Prayer by Garrett Hanrahan was my favorite debut in 2019. Well, you know where I'm going with this, right? The Boonshot Daughter is my favorite debut in 2020. For those of you who don't know, I'm a huge fan of Orbit books. I think they continuously publish some of the best debut in fantasy right now. And this is no exception. Kings of the Wild was published by Orbit, The Gutter Prayer was published by Orbit, and this is also published by Orbit. Give this Asian-inspired fantasy a try. It's incredible. At the number 15 spot is Skin Game by Jim Butcher. This is the 15th book in the Dresden File series, and Skin Game is published in 2014. Although I've read everything in the Dresden File series, I think the best one is still either Skin Game or Changes. And you should just check out Patrick Rothfuss's review on this book, where he called the Dresden Files his favorite series of all time. And I think the praises for this series is quite well deserved. At the number 14 spot is Holo Empire by Sam Hawke. This is the 2nd book in the Poison Wars duology. Well, currently it's a duology. If the sales for this series is high enough, there will be a continuation, but if not, this is the end of the series. And I love City of Lies, Sam Hawke's debut, the first book in the series, but I think Holo Empire is such a significant improvement. Every page of this book was engaging. The characterization for the two main characters, Jovan and Kalina, were so well written. I think the siblings' relationship between the two of them are so genuine. And if you haven't read this series and you find this series looking interesting, please get yourself a copy as soon as possible, because, well, I do believe that there is still room for one more book here, and I want it. The number 13 spot is Dragon Mage by M.L. Spencer. I just talked about this book in my previous video. Well, I called it one of my favorite standalone of all time right now. And I mean it. It's really that good. It is compelling, the main characters were so incredibly well written, and the world building are amazing. M.L. Spencer did not just build one world within this standalone, she built two. There is the world above, where there is no more magical creatures, and then there's the world below, where almost all the magical creatures of the world still resides. This one comes out 2 weeks from now, and you will want to get it. This is the kind of book that will remind you why you fell in love with classic epic fantasy in the first place. The number 12 spot is Shorefall by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the second book in the Founders Trilogy. I have praised Robert Jackson Bennett's works for a while now, and I think he's one of those authors that can combine epic fantasy, sci-fi, and urban fantasy all in one book or one series. I highly recommend this series to those who love Mistborn Trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I think there is a lot in this series that very reminiscent of that series, especially in the first book. But yeah, Robert Jackson Bennett is one of my favorite authors. I absolutely love Divine Series Trilogy and this series. I cannot wait for the third book to come out. I'm not sure whether it will come out next year or not, but I'm looking forward to it. At the number 11 spot is The Stone Knife by Anna Stevens. This is the first book in the Songs of the Drowned trilogy. Anna Stevens' previous trilogy is called the Godblind trilogy. I've read only the first book. That one is a Grimdark trilogy. I think this one is kinda a mix between epic fantasy and Grimdark. It's not thoroughly Grimdark, and I absolutely love this one. I like Godblind, but The Stone Knife, wow, it's amazing. And not gonna lie, there is a bit of a learning curve in the beginning, so make sure to be ready for that. But once you get settled, trust me, you will not be able to put this down. It's so good. At the number 10 spot is A Fool's Hope by Mike Shackle. This is the second book in the Last War trilogy, one of my favorite ongoing series right now. As I've said several times before, I think Mike Shackle is one of the most underrated authors in the genre right now. The first book, We Are the Dead, and A Fool's Hope, both of them are in my favorite shelf. I love this so much. I think Mike Shackles writes action-packed fantasy that doesn't sacrifice its necessary characterizations. And because the characterizations for his characters are so good, his actions became more intense. I love that kind of series, and I think Mike Shackle definitely nailed it in his debut trilogy. There's only one more book left. I think it will come out next year, I think. There's no confirmation yet, but it is one of my most anticipated books right now. At the number 9 spot is The Fires of Vengeance by Evan Winter. I have the book now. It's so gorgeous. The cover art is done by Carla Ortiz. And this is the second book in the Burning Quartet. The first book is The Rage of Dragons. And I thought The Rage of Dragon was incredible already, but this one somehow, without a doubt, was exceptionally better. I think we fantasy readers should definitely pay attention to Evan Winter's career. I'm sure his name will get more famous and famous as time goes by. And this one is again another action-packed book. If you love the breakneck speed and pacing in Red Rising Saga by Prisbon, well, you just found the fantasy equivalent. In the number 8 spot is Kings of Heaven by Richard Nell. This is the third book and the final book in the Ash and Sand trilogy. Ash and Sand trilogy is, in my opinion, the best self-published fantasy series that I've read. Overall, it is just the best. The second book and the third book in this trilogy, in my opinion, were some of the best grimdark fantasy books that I've read so far. And the main character, Ruka, reminds me so much of Logan Ninefingers from the First Law series. That's pretty much all you need to know. Seriously, give this series a try. It's magnificent. And at the number 7 spot is another self-published book. This one is Paternus, War of Gods by Dyrk Ashton. This is the final book in the Paternus trilogy, and it is one of the most satisfying conclusions that I've ever read. It is so damn epic. I didn't expect that this series would become this epic. I'm speaking about 200 pages of final battle with hundreds of thousands of creatures fighting for the sake of the world. And this is epic urban fantasy at its best. If you love epic and massive battles, if you love mythologies, if you love engaging narrative, and if you love satisfying conclusion, well, you should read this trilogy. And you have to read this book. At the number 6 spot is The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. This is the third and final book in the Poppy War trilogy, and it is one of my favorite books of all time. I'm just genuinely amazed by Rebecca Kuang. With every book, she constantly gets better and her writing gets more well polished. I love the first book, The Poppy War, but I think what Rebecca Kwong has done with this book is just stunning. With the conclusion of this trilogy, I'm sure she will be hailed as one of the queen of modern fantasy. She's already one now for me. And now we have arrived at the top 5 of this list. At the number 5 spot is The Trouble with Peace by Joe Abercrombie. This is the second book in the Age of Madness trilogy, his newest trilogy in the First Law world. Abercrombie just amazed me. Seriously. I mean, this is already his 12th book and his writing craft just keeps on getting better and better. As I constantly said, Abercrombie is the kind of authors that could write characters so good. In the entire grimdark genre, I don't think there is any authors that can write characters as good as Abercrombie. There's so many characters in this series now, and I think all of them have distinctive voices. I'm just so amazed by Joe Abercrombie. The First Law trilogy was the first grimdark fantasy novels that I've read, and it is the one that got me into reading more grimdark novels. I've read or watched a lot of grimdark manga or anime before, but for novels, the First Law series was the one that got me into reading his books, and I think the second book in the Age of Madness trilogy just continued to establish why he's called the Lord of Grimdark. It's just amazing, and the third book will come out next year. It's called The Wisdom of Crowds, and I think that one could actually be the best book in Abercrombie's career so far. We'll see. At the number 4 spot is The Light of All That Falls by James Islington. This is the third and final book in the Lycaeneus trilogy, and it is an extremely satisfying conclusion to the series. I cannot believe that this is his debut trilogy. It's insane. Although I do recommend the first book, The Shadow of What Was Lost, to newcomers to adult fantasy, I do want to give an advice that the second and the third book, the complexities improve significantly. And I think this is one of those trilogy that you should binge read as close as possible. Because believe me, there's a lot of complexities, there's a lot of details, and it's very easy to forget a lot of them. I binge read this trilogy non-stop, and even then I think I still miss some details, but I definitely will reread this one day. One of the main characters in this series, Caden, is one of my favorite protagonists in fantasy novels. Islington has mentioned that he started writing this trilogy after he finished reading Mistborn and the Kingkiller Chronicle, and I think I can see the inspirations appearing in his books. If you haven't read this trilogy, please give this trilogy a try. I'm begging you. I think it's still quite underrated right now, and it is one of my favorite trilogies of all time. This will probably surprise some of you, but at the number 3 spot is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. Yes, this is not the number 1 spot, this is not the number 2 spot. Don't get me wrong, I still absolutely love this book. I mean, this is at the number 3 spot. It's still very high. It's just that, in my opinion, the next two are even better. Because Rhythm of War, in my opinion, do has some flaws, especially in part 3 and the flashback chapters. Brandon Sanderson is one of the most prolific authors right now, and the Stormlight Archive is definitely his magnum opus. I cannot wait for the 5th book. I think that one could actually be the best book of the series. That sounds crazy, but it is actually possible, especially if you're caught up with the entire Cosmere books now. There's just so much to this book, and well, I've done a full spoiler-free review, the longest review I've ever written, and I also done one for my booktube channel. You can check them out. At the number 2 spot is The Labyrinth of the Spirits by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is the 4th and final book in the Cemetery of Forgotten book series. This was first translated to English in 2018. I've been rendered completely speechless by this quartet. They are just some of the best books that I've ever read out of every genre. And I think this one is the brilliant masterwork that settles Cemetery of Forgotten books as one of my favorite series of all time. Zafón was a genius. He was a genius. When I heard that he passed away, I was genuinely sad. I remember that I just finished this book and this series, which I hold dear to my heart now. And then I heard that he passed away. It devastated me. I actually felt sad about it. The world of literature has truly lost a genius. I'm actually sad at myself that I've waited so long to read this quartet. It is just a masterpiece. Although in the beginning of this book it is mentioned that you can just start reading the series from here, I truly don't recommend that. Please read this series in publication order. Start from Shadow of the Wind, then The Angel's Game, then The Prisoner of Heaven, then this one. If you read this series in publication order, I think this one will definitely blow you away. And we have arrived at the number 1 spot. This is the best book that I've read in 2020, and I don't think this will surprise anybody. Well, this is A Time of Courage by John Gwynne. This is the third and final book in Of Blood and Bone trilogy, and it is also the book that concludes the Banished Land saga that consists of the Faithful and the Fallen Quartet and Of Blood and Bone trilogy. A Time of Courage is just epic fantasy at its best. I have praised Gwyn's books for 3 or 4 years now, I think, and I don't think I will ever stop doing that. In my opinion, he is the most consistently amazing author right now in the genre. Not even Brandon Sanderson is as consistently good as him, in my opinion. His characterizations of all his characters, not just the protagonist, but the antagonist as well, are just phenomenal. They're all just felt so real to me, and this book features one of the longest battles that I've read so far in my entire life. I think the last battle in A Time of Courage was about 200 pages long, and I didn't felt bored by it, not for one page. It was so epic, it was incredibly well written, and well, it's John Gwyn. The ending was so satisfying. A Time of Courage and the conclusion of the Faithful and the Fallen Quartet, Wrath, are still Gwyn's best work so far. If you love epic fantasy and you somehow haven't tried any of Gwyn's books, please consider fixing that now. The entire Banished Land saga is my favorite completed series right now, and John Gwyn is one of my favorite authors of all time. Gwyn has a new book coming out next year. It is called The Shadow of the Gods, and it is the first book in a completely new series that's separate from this series, and it's my #1 most anticipated book of next year. And that's the end of this video. That's the 20 best books that I've read in 2020, and believe me, choosing these books are difficult. There are a lot of great books that I've read within this year. We all know that this year is insane, but reading wise, I think this is one of the best reading year that I've had, maybe even the best since 2018. I want to say thank you to every authors who write books, included on this list or not. Without books, video game, television, pretty much art, I don't know how I would have survived this year. So in a way, I think authors and artists are underappreciated heroes. And that's all from me today. This is the last list video that I'm making for this year. And lastly, I want to say thank you so much to all of you who keep on supporting me, watching my videos, reading my reviews. It truly means a lot to me. And before I end this video, I want to give a shout out to Elliot Brooks, an incredible booktuber. Thank you so much, Al, for giving me a shout out in your recent video. I think this channel received about 500 new subscribers because of your shout out. And I just want to say thank you so much to you, and thank you so much to both old and new subscribers. This booktube channel is still new and I still have a lot to learn, and I truly appreciate your support. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think about my list of best books of 2020? And what's the best book that you've read this year? Let me know. As always, thank you so much for your support, and Merry Christmas. Please take care of yourself, have a lovely holiday, and stay safe. Bye bye.